Now, I may talk a little on the effects of the inequality, in which actually there are two different effects that are mentioned usually. One is the effect as a motivator of the people. When there is inequality, uh, some people are living better life standards than the others. This might, according to um, them, uh, one of the dominant views of the in economics, may make people to work harder, work more, be more productive, so that they can get to that income level and live a more comfortable life. Personally, I question this view. Increasingly more. I thought previously this might be not that much true. Now I even think it might be completely wrong, but that's another discussion. This view exists in the literature, so it's one of the views still. Um, the second view basically states that inequality might basically prevent people to get necessary things like social connections, the college education for which they might also spend money at least to get to the college education. In some cases, even to study in colleges. Uh, Colleges might also cost money, or even in some cases they might not afford not to work and instead go to college. Um, and also like capital, the to become financial resources to open companies. So this inequality might basically create barriers, and actually it might prevent people to get to the higher positions to the world. So much less than motivating people by thinking they might get to higher positions in society. It might basically fix the people's positions in the society, whatever their productivity or however much their motivation is. Uh, well, there is some view that there can be a threshold level of inequality where actually the first effect of inequality becomes more dominant, and below which first effect of inequality might be dominant, and above which the second effect might be dominant. Keynesian view basically supports this, and in the first video at the beginning, also you might see from the tone the people are basically believing that idea. Um, So this is actually a way to test this hypothesis. And here, actually, unfortunately, I cannot introduce you the variable, which is a really interesting variable in full sense. But let me just mention what it is. It is intergenerational immobility, which means as it gets higher, that means it tests, for example, what is the percentage of, actually, it counts how many of the children who are earning an income at an interval, for example, $1,000 to, for example, $100,000 to $200,000, get a higher income and get a lower income. Get income below 100,000 or get an income above 100,000. So you see how mobile people are. Do they get an income similar to their parents, or do they get income um, less or more than their parents? And you test it for all income groups, and you just bring uh, all data together and create an index that measures the level of mobility or immobility in society. As high When it is higher, you got a higher immobility, and you can see that as inequality increases, immobility increases. So inequality doesn't increase, mobility basically in the society. And this is, by the way, United States. We don't have Turkey here. We have Brazil here. Um, we have Peru here. These are very unequal societies. This is interesting. China and USA is here. They have same level of inequality, but immobility is higher in China. Um, Also, immobility is higher in Japan compared with Sweden, even though the inequality levels are same. So it's an interesting data to look at. Basically, interesting chart to look at. Um, so uh, the effect of inequality as a barrier, that was actually well, it was mentioned by Marx, but even by Marx, certain level of certain type of people who live in very bad conditions have become reported in Europe increasingly. Why their living standards were so bad was a matter of discussion, and according to some people, that's because those people were were lazy, naturally lazy, and there were some attempts. I mean, some let's say programs that were aiming to increase um, their um, their drive to work harder. Um, However, the fact that those low-income people exist was something that societies were uh, feel obligated to react to it. This is actually a book written in New York City for New York City, the low-income people of New York City, by Jacob Rees, I believe Danish immigrant to United States. And Marx famously argues that capitalism actually creates this low-income group and requires this low-income group to exist also. And this aspect of Marx is basically a subject of discussion. I mean, looking to the some developing countries. I mean, especially in 1950s and 60s, the question was asked: maybe the low-income group who are desperate, who are just about to uh, uh, who are just about to being rejected from the society culture or not being able to participate in the society culturally. Is this really a requirement of the capitalist system, or capitalist system can eradicate poverty, if not inequality, completely? That was a question. But Marx stated pretty much how the capitalist system is creating this poverty by creating certain wealth barriers. And the response to this actually has been in Europe, starting with even 19th century. Uh, uh, well, this is Marxian explanation. A worker should not be able to buy his own means of production, the tools necessary to become a capitalist, or it should be very risky for him to buy it. So labor should be the only thing the workers should sell. Well, this characteristic doesn't require poverty, but workers should also not have sufficient wealth stocks so that the wage level of the workers could be reduced to a level where they where I mean, which is cheap enough, low enough for the capitalists to profit, and that relative share of workers needs to continuously decrease in capitalist system, also according to Marx, but that's another discussion. Um, so, interestingly, Marx has done it of. I mean, he says in a way, workers should be desperate. Workers' bargaining power against the capitalists should not be high, and workers should have only their labor power to sell. It should not be easy for them. I mean, some of them can go up, but that number should be always limited and restricted. The number of people who actually buy their own means of production and produce become capitalists should be limited. But one idea that was developed in the late 19th century and early 20th century, actually, the 20th century was exactly, was the idea that market with some redistribution actually create better results. And this model might supposedly also have justified the welfare state idea. So the main idea comes from the welfare theorem. Welfare theorem, actually there are two welfare theorems. The first welfare theorem states that whenever people's initial endowments, initial level of resources are fixed, and when you allow people to exchange those resources freely, they both can get better off, and they both get a point where basically being better off becomes impossible for one of them without increasing the let's say, life standard level or happiness level of the other one. So market mechanism brings the people to well, a point where both of them can be better off, and basically, well, it's called Pareto efficient point, and at that point, mutual benefits, mutual improvements become not anymore possible. But if initial resources are not distributed evenly by historical, by market process or by the historical procedures, the events happened in the past which were not a fault of the person, basically. In that case, very well, you might say that because initial distributions are not just, the outcome might also not just. So if you think that, you can just redistribute the initial resources and then leave the rest to the market and get into a new outcome, which will be in which both of them will be again better off compared with the initial point, and again which would be just, which could be just according to you. So leaving everything else to the market mechanism and just redistributing the resources might, in that sense, a good a way to get to any fair distribution, fair outcome in the economy according to the two welfare theorems. So, by the way, this is one of the posters of Roosevelt, which he calls Four Freedoms, and he said, "We are fighting for four of those freedoms. The other ones are freedom of speech, I believe, freedom of religion, freedom from want, and freedom from fear." Interesting, freedom from want is actually it's like freedom from poverty. So basically, Roosevelt wanted to erase poverty in the United States after the Second World War, and he did also some active policies for that, actually, to achieve that aim. So, welfare state, basically, which the core principles of it was founded even before Roosevelt, it has become kind of instrument which was aiming to achieve this aim. So its basic idea was providing certain services freely, like healthcare services, education, maybe some of them in a substituted way, like transportation, so that all of these services are increasing life standards of all people to a minimum level. Well, certain things could be given by specifically to low-income people, for example, subsidies for the food consumption. Certain things could be given to all citizens, like, for example, free healthcare services. Still, I mean, if people want, they could have a better and healthcare services for an actual paying actual money, but everyone can use these free healthcare services independent of their income. Well, we might think welfare service state is taking income from certain groups and give it other groups. You might think it's even direct. In some cases, it might do it in direct way if it gives financial support to certain people in the society. But in other cases, it can do it also in direct way because it takes tax from the high-income people, but those high-income people, for them, it's easier to buy those services that are provided freely by the state. So it's kind of has a redistributive power also. And between 1960s and 1980s, United States welfare state has been growth, and it has been an important part of the United States, and it also the era was also an era where poverty in the United States has been decreasing. However, then certain objections have been raised to the welfare state, and we will discover what those objections were in the next part.